What's up, guys? Your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson here, and you might notice this recording sounds different than the usual podcast, and that is because I'm sitting outside here in Lockhart, Texas, recording this ad into my iPhone. It probably sounds pretty crappy. Well, I'm doing this to show you something very cool. Many of you guys know that my production team works over at Podsworth Media, and they've been producing my show for quite a while. I get a lot of questions and people asking, who does your podcast? Why does it sound great? And I'm telling you why. It's because the guys at Podsworth are amazing. They've got this brand new online app for taking rough recordings like this and making them a whole lot cleaner and more listenable with just a few easy clicks. It will remove background noise. It reduces plosives, it fixes clipping, which is distortion from recording with the gain up too high, clipping, which is distortion from recording with the gain up too high, which I can promise you I've done many times, and they fixed this for me. It removes clicks and pops, and then also levels out the dialogue, so there's no crazy where the guest sounds too loud or the interviewer sounds too quiet. Here's what you guys can do. All of y'all that are interested in recording podcasts or audiobooks or anything, if you're a pastor and you want your sermon recorded, whatever the case may be, go to podsworth.com and click Get Started. You drag and drop your audio files or click to open your file manager. This also works on your smartphone's web browser. You customize your settings that you want, but the default works fine on most podcast recordings. Then enter code BUCK50. BUCK50 for 50% off of your first order. You don't need an account, just an email address and payment. And you'll get a download link in your email for your cleaned up files. How cool is this? The guys at Podsworth run everything they do through this app before they do anything else to it. So all of my recordings go through this app that we're talking about. It works great. Like I said, any spoken word recordings, obviously for podcasts, YouTube videos, sermons, audiobooks, whatever. It will make awful recordings sound listenable and much more professional. So, like I said, go to podsworth.com and click Get Started. You can use promo code BUCK50, BUCK50, for 50% off of your first order. You can use promo code BUCK50, BUCK50, for 50% off of your first order. Let's get it.
You are now listening to the Counterflow Podcast, a place for dissonant voices and unapproved opinions.
You get split in half, but I call the hologram brass. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Here is your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson.
What's up, you guys? Welcome back once again to the Counterflow Podcast. As always, I am your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson. I'm glad you're here for this week. This is a fascinating one. Julie Mastrine is back on the show in the co-host seat for this episode, and I have her here because a few months ago, she went and saw Father Vincent Lampert give a presentation 2 nights in a row, a presentation on what he does. He is our guest, and she said, Buck, you got to get him on. And I said, well, I will if you come on to chat with him as well for a few reasons. She saw him, so she knew this material, but she grew up Catholic and I did not. And so I thought maybe there could be some insights that she would have into the stuff that I would not have. And so she's back. And what do you think about exorcisms? Well, whatever preconceived notions you have, maybe they're about to be proven correct. Maybe they're about to be popped. We shall see. I found this conversation very, very cool, very fascinating. And what a line of work, expelling demons from people who are possessed by them. And he has some stories, as you're about to hear. If your worldview is that of strictly materialist, this might sound crazy to you. I don't know. I'm anxious to see what some of the listeners say who aren't necessarily, don't view the world in a spiritual way, and that's not a knock by any means. If you are of that mindset, I'm curious to see what you would think of this one, because it's fascinating. You're about to find out. Father Vincent Lampert, he is an American Catholic priest, and the designated exorcist of the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Indianapolis. I'm glad he's here to cleanse this show of everything that should be cleansed from it. Father Vincent Lampert, Julie Mastrine, welcome to the show, you guys.
Thank you, Buck. It's good to be with you today.
You were my first Catholic priest on this show, so it's like a groundbreaking moment. I've had a lot of Orthodox priests, but not yet a Catholic one. So I'm glad to have you here. And I have to give Julie some credit because she saw your speech in her hometown speech. That almost sounds weird. Your presentation in March, and she said this guy was unbelievable. And so here you are. I'm glad to have you here. I'll let you kind of tell my folks what you do, and then we'll go from there.
I am a Catholic priest for the Archdiocese of Indianapolis. I was ordained a priest back on June the 1st of 1991. So I'm coming up on my 32nd anniversary. And 18 years ago in 2005, the bishop of my diocese appointed me to be the exorcist. So it's my role within the Archdiocese of Indianapolis to investigate cases of alleged demonic activity and then make the determination if the rite of exorcism needs to be performed.
You probably understand the misconceptions better than anyone that pop culture, probably myself, and to some extent have as far as what you do, because we all see it move. I'm a firefighter, and everyone knows what that is, and there's still tons of misconceptions about that. So being an exorcist is such a unique niche, I would say. Before we get into it, a good ground definition of what an exorcist is.
An exorcist is a priest who's called to perform exorcisms. Now, the word exorcism is a Greek word, comes from the Greek word exorcismos, and it means an insistent request manifested before God or directed against demons. So literally, to exorcise means to command with an oath. And it's using the power of God to help those who are being afflicted by evil.
It is throughout the Bible. Am I wrong in that? Exorcist?
No, one of the big things, I say one of the big things about Jesus' ministry was he was about curing those who were sick, and he was also about casting out demons. So Jesus himself even made a clear distinction between those who were physically sick and those who are being tormented by demons. I think a lot of people today may question the validity of exorcism, thinking that perhaps it's a throwback to the time of Jesus, the time when mental health issues weren't well understood. But again, I think it's important to note that Jesus made the distinction between a physical malady and a spiritual affliction. So we should still make that distinction today.
Yeah, and you kind of answered almost what I was going to ask next. And you must see a lot of people, even Christians and Catholics and whatnot, that believe the Bible and yet make this distinction like, well, those days are different. These things in the Bible, this doesn't happen now. And so do you catch that kind of, not flack, so to speak, but pushback and things like that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people that simply don't want to believe that evil is a reality, because if you truly believe that evil is a reality, it's going to really challenge you to question your own faith and what it is that you actually believe. You know, faith is more than just going to church, and church is not just some club or organization we belong to, but we believe that the church is an institution that Jesus established that allows us to have a connection with God. And certainly there are forces at work that would want to disrupt that connection. And at least from a Catholic perspective, we would say that would be the devil and these other evil spirits who would want humanity to reject God as they have. And, you know, that's a growing trend today. You know, faith is in decline here in the States. You know, even though Christianity built Western civilization, there are a lot of people today that even if they grew up in a traditional Christian home, may now be rejecting that faith. I read a study just the other day that said in 1999, 70% of Americans attended some house of worship. And now today, the number is 47%. And 1 out of 5 Americans now claims to be an atheist. So there is a growing trend for people not only to reject belief in the devil, But there's even a greater trend, I think, of people rejecting the belief in God because there's still a fascination with the devil. The joke amongst exorcists is if you're going to give a talk about the devil, 200 people will show up. If you're going to talk about Jesus, 20 people will show up. There's 2 new movies out right now, The Pope's Exorcist and Nefarious. And again, there's a lot of fascination with that and about the devil. And so we need to be careful about making sure that we don't give the devil any more credit than he's due. Because even, like I say, the ministry of exorcism really isn't focusing on what the devil is doing. It's focusing on what God wants to do in people's lives. So my goal is to focus on helping people see the face of God, not to see the devil everywhere.
So you'd mentioned the decline of church attendance, and something you'd said during your talk when I saw you in Pennsylvania is that there were 12 exorcists in the U.S., I think. Hopefully I got that right, when you started. And today there are 175. Did I get those numbers right?
Yes, that's true.
And and then you also said you receive, I think you said 3,500 emails, letters, phone calls every year. Have you seen those numbers change in relation to the decline of religiosity? Do you get more phone calls now than you used to or less? And can you speak to at all why there are more exorcists now than when you started?
Yeah, so the Archdiocese of Indianapolis has always had a Catholic priest assigned to this ministry. Even when it fell out of practice in many dioceses after the Second Vatican Council that ended in 1965, Indianapolis always maintained a priest in this office. Our exorcist died in 2005, and so the Archbishop appointed me, and he even told me, he said, I don't really know what I'm asking you to do, but we've always had a priest in this role, and I don't want to break that continuity. And then that's when he sent me to Rome for training. The church says the best way to learn the ministry is through the apprenticeship model, working under a more seasoned exorcist. It's easy to read the scriptures and understand the theology about the devil and what the church believes, but it's another thing to deal with it firsthand. So in 2006, I spent 3 months in Rome, where a Franciscan priest allowed me to sit in on 40 exorcisms that he performed during the time that I was there. And that allowed me to learn firsthand the church's ministry to those who are up against the forces of evil. Now, there is a training school in the United States now for Catholic priests to become an exorcist. And that's where many of the new ones are coming from. I think the church has realized that if the church is not addressing people's concerns about extraordinary demonic activity in their life, that it may encourage people to turn to other sources for the help that they need. And maybe the people they're turning to really aren't the best option, because oftentimes you may run into so-called professional exorcists, but they're not faith-based. They're not rooted in any faith tradition. It's just an occupation that one has taken on. And ultimately, in an exorcism, Jesus is the main actor. He's not a bystander. I even tell people I don't have any special powers. People relying on me as an individual, we're all in trouble. But if we're relying on the power and the authority of Christ present in his church and in its ministers, that's the right mentality to have. So the number today has grown to more than 175. And I think that's an indication that the church is listening to the number of people who believe that they're dealing with this extraordinary demonic activity. Faith in God leads in one direction, the lack of faith leads in another. I don't believe the devil has upped his game today. I just believe that more people are willing to play the devil's game because they're walking away from God. And really, an exorcist is helping people to turn back around and to enter into a relationship with God once again. Because the further we are removed from God, perhaps we're more vulnerable to the attacks of the devil.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask you, there's a very, I don't mean spirit necessarily in the type of spirits we're discussing, but there's a spirit of individualism, probably post-enlightenment, but it's certainly bigger now, where there's often a lot of people will think, I can do whatever I want. This is a free country as long as I don't hurt anyone else. And so there's a sort of removal of certain boundaries that people have on their lives and their moralities. Certainly, I think we've seen that a lot in the last, couple of decades. have you noticed as people lower those boundaries around morality and then maybe spiritually as well, it allows demonic influences to basically seep in easier because without the boundaries, do these demons enter people with an easier time, I suppose?
No, absolutely. The human person is called to live with limitations. If you think about the biblical story of the book of Genesis, Adam and Eve are told that they may eat of any of the fruit of the trees in the garden, but of the one tree, the tree of good and evil, they were not to eat. So living within limitations is what God expects of us. But there's a lot of people, as you alluded to, they live by three guiding principles. You may do whatever you wish. Nobody has the right to command you, and you are the God of yourself.
Yes.
Freedom, for me, freedom in the true sense of the word, means to live in the manner that God created us to live. When we humans live the way that God intended, that's freedom in the true sense of the word. So for me, obedience and authentic freedom go hand in hand. When we believe freedom means that we can live without limits, do whatever we want, then we end up becoming slaves to our own passions and desires. And so I think when people live outside of those boundaries that God has established, and we can certainly do that because we have free will, but when we choose to do that, we make ourselves more vulnerable to the attacks of the devil. I believe the greatest thing that we can give to God is our free will. That's the one thing God does not have. It's the one thing that God desires. And so we give God our free will when we choose to be obedient to God and again, to live in the manner that he created us to live. Pope Benedict once said that just because the human person is capable of doing something doesn't mean it's the right thing to do.
Right. Yeah. Well put. We have to do this, and I'm sure people ask you this all the time. Because again, with I can kind of relate a little bit because of my job. Someone will see, let's say, Chicago Fire or one of these TV shows and go, is that really what your job's like? Almost knowing that it's not like that. So unfortunately for most of us, we've never been part of an exorcism, except I guess technically I was becoming a catechumen because there's some exorcism prayers read then. But
yeah.
we know this image and this fantasy world in the movies, Poltergeist, of course, and now you alluded to the movie, I think, with Russell Crowe or something in it right now that's out. What's it really like when you're in an performing an exorcism versus what we all think it looks like from the TV shows and movies?
When somebody is possessed, it doesn't mean that they're manifesting evil all the time. The manifestations of the devil are meant to instill fear. The devil is basically saying, look at me and what I'm capable of doing. It's like a child having a temper tantrum. The devil would prefer to remain anonymous, if you will, and not be out in the open. But a rite of exorcism compels the demon to reveal itself because they're very arrogant. I had an exorcist friend one time who told me he was doing an exorcism and he was giving commands to the demons. And the demon shouted at him and said, who do you think you are to tell me what to do? You're nothing but a stupid, crazy monkey. So demons cannot accept the fact that they're being commanded to do something by a creature they consider to be inferior to itself. And so these manifestations, they can include everything from eyes rolled in the back of the head, foaming at the mouth, growling and snarling, throwing out cuss words, blasphemies. The temperature in the room can drop and become much colder. There can be horrible sketches. There can be levitation where the human body will actually begin to rise. Hideous grins and uncontrollable laughter, hysteria. Even the demon can cause the human body to drop to the ground and begin to slither like a snake across the floor. All of these things really do happen. But again, the demon is trying to say, look at what I'm capable of doing. And what I'm capable of doing far out surpasses what you're trying to do in this particular prayer of the church.
Cooley?
I think I might have asked you this when I saw you, but can you speak to how the church determined, maybe first you could speak to what is done during an exorcism, like what the rite of exorcism looks like, and then how did the church come to that process as something that works?
Mhm. So the rite of exorcism has developed throughout the 2,000-year history of the church. It was formally codified in the year 1614. So there became an official rite of exorcism at that time, and it compiled together a lot of components that were being used during the first 1,500 years of the church. That rite, again, was updated in 1999. So it was tweaked again. And then the thing about the new rite is it contains, there's two types of exorcism prayers: commands given to demons and then prayers directed to God. The prayers that are directed to God are called supplicating exorcism prayers. And they were added into the new rite. And the purpose was to place into the hands of every parish priest prayers that he could use to pray with his parishioners who believed that they were being afflicted by evil. So some of the elements of the rite, it always begins with blessing the person with holy water, reminding us of our baptism into Christ. There is the litany of the saints, calling upon the holy men and women of the church to be present during this particular prayer of the church, the praying of psalms, gospel accounts of Jesus casting out demons, the prologue of John's gospel, which speaks of the Word became flesh, the incarnation. There are trying to get the person, if they're a Christian, to renew their baptismal promises. You could pray the Lord's Prayer, the Hail Mary prayer throughout the rite as an opportunity for the priest to watch and observe, the manifestations. There is the laying on the hands of the head of the person, and then invoking the Holy Spirit by breathing on the face of the person. It's called the insufflation prayer. It recalls Jesus breathing on his disciples and receive the Holy Spirit, because wherever the Holy Spirit is present, an unclean spirit cannot remain. And then there is the supplicating prayer addressed to God, who is asked to bring relief into the life of this person who is suffering. And then there is an imperative command to the demon, whereby the demon is ordered to obey the authority of the church and the church's minister, and then to depart from this creature of God. The rite has to be prayed completely through one time. As I'm praying the rite, I will watch and observe. If particular parts of the rite seem to have a more profound impact on the demon, then I will go back and then repeat those components as a way of telling the demon that it must depart. Now, it is interesting to note that, again, every demon is different. So every exorcism session will be different, and working with a person is different. And it's always important to make the distinction between the person as an individual and the demon who's now using that person's body as if it were its own. So I would never say, for example, during an exorcism, Jane Doe said this, did that. I would always say the demon did it, because now the entire actions of that body are now wholly defined by the demon. The demon is using the person's mouth to speak, their eyes to see, their ears to hear, their hands and arms to give gestures. So it is important to make that clear distinction between the person as an individual and now the demon that is using that body as if it were its own. And why would the demon be interested in possessing a human body? And the answer is at the very core of our Christian faith. The greatest thing that God did for us is the incarnation. God took on human form in the person of Jesus. So a demon, in its own twisted sense, believes it takes on human form by possessing a human body. But then what does it do when it possesses? It basically distorts the human body, again, mocking it, because the demon believes that indirectly by mocking the human person, it's mocking God himself.
Is there there must be a voluntary element to this. Obviously, they're not going to drag a person in and tie them to the chair, but you would think that the demon itself would fight the person wanting to do the exorcism. So is there kind of an issue where someone doesn't want to go, or they get cold feet and then they don't show up? How does it work with them getting there and being willing to do such a thing?
Yes. So an exorcism cannot be performed on anyone against their will. Again, we all have that free will. And just because a person is possessed doesn't mean they're manifesting all the time. To be possessed means that the person did something to create an entry point for the demonic into their life that gave that demon a foothold, if you will. And so a person who is possessed can be going through the normal daily routine of their life. They could be going to work, they could be going grocery shopping, but then something will trigger the demon to manifest. Even the elements of the rite of exorcism are meant to force the demon to show itself, because only when the demon shows itself does the battle against it begin.
Well, you just said something. You kind of led me into my next question. I wanted to ask. You said that they did something or something of that nature where they allowed the demon to enter them, and of course, AI has been a big topic lately, and there's some people that believe AI itself is demonic in the sense that you're summoning demons or you're getting involved in a tool, I suppose, with a tool that allows demonic entry. And there's been a lot of things where they've had AI bots, if you want to call it that, basically say that they are demons. And then, of course, there's things like pornography, or I don't know. I want to ask you about, I guess, what are common ways that demons can enter into a person through tools that we all might use, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. The first comment I would make is, there's technology in and of itself is not bad. The question is, what do we do with it? In 1988, Pope John Paul II, in his encyclical letter on the Gospel of Life, in that document, he wrote that one of his greatest fears was that virtual reality would become the final enslavement of the human soul, where the human person would choose to live in a reality of our own creation rather than in God's creation. And if you look at it today, so many people are absorbed in technology. We have all these gadgets in front of us, but they're leading us into isolation. The human person needs to be in community to properly grow and develop. Can you imagine a newborn child never being picked up or held? The child would not properly grow. But so many people today are isolated. They don't see the value of community and being connected with one another. So there is that danger that a lot of technology is pulling people further and further away from God. Because again, to be a person of faith means to be in community. And I do believe the human person has the innate desire for God. That, it was St. Augustine writing at the end of the 4th, early 5th century, where he said, "You have created us for yourself, O God, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you." So ultimately, only God can satisfy the deepest longings of the human heart. It's not technology, it's not knowledge, it's not information, it's not addictive behavior, whether it's alcohol, drugs, pornography, gambling, whatever it might be. When people encounter an emptiness in their life, they try to fill it. But ultimately, that emptiness can only be filled by God himself. And I think the devil uses a lot of this addictive behavior as the way to pull people further and further away from God. So some entry points would be ties to the world of the occult. The word occult comes from the Latin word occultus, meaning hidden or secret. It focuses on knowledge of the paranormal. Its basic premise is that people want a glimpse into the future. They want to know, if you will. That's why people go see a psychic or a medium. They use pendulums or crystals. They do magic, whatever. They're trying to literally take the place of God and have their own information at their own fingertips. I like to tell people that many people might be familiar with the painting on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in Rome. It's a God finger touching the finger of Adam. So it's a very popular painting. But many people don't realize that when you look at that painting, God is floating on a cloud. And the cloud is in the shape of a human brain. So when God is touching the finger of Adam, he's giving him the ability to think and reason. And I think a lot of things that people do today are diminishing our ability to think and reason. You were mentioning like AI. We want other things to do that for us, and we should be doing that for ourselves. So again, technology is not inherently evil, but it can be a tool that the devil may use to lead us into isolation. And then what becomes a substitute? So ties to the occult and create an entry point for the demonic. The entertainment industry is another heading I use. Halloween is very popular. The devil is very popular today. The danger with the entertainment industry is that the devil can play on a person's memory and imagination. So we put these thoughts and images into our head, and then the devil can use that to instill fear in us. For example, does the devil have horns and walk around with a pitchfork and, a tail and hooves? No, but that's an image that's been passed down through the ages because one that can instill fear in people. And so the devil can use that as a way to control people. If people live in fear, they can be controlled. When people live in faith, they live in freedom. Other entry points would be being cursed. I tell people that a curse is only effective if you're weak in your faith. You can't control what another person does. They may wish you ill will and want to curse you. But if you're, as St. Paul says, putting on the armor of Christ, then it doesn't matter what somebody else is doing. If you're being true to God and living out your faith, you're going to church and praying and reading the Bible, the devil's already on the run. We don't have to do anything extraordinary. Being dedicated to a demon, either by someone else or by yourself. I've encountered many people who kind of sold their soul to the devil, to use that term. So they created a connection with demons because they believed that it gave them certain powers and abilities. I had a young man who told me that once he declared Satan to be his father, he found such a power that he never knew before, and it was so addictive that he didn't think he could ever let it go. Abuse can also be an entry point, especially when it causes people to maybe blame God for their brokenness, so they turn away from God and then maybe enter into that world of the occult where they believe their broken lives can be put back together again. So there are many different avenues that people can use. And, each person is unique in the circumstances that may have created that connection with the demonic in their life. I do see 3,500 people reach out to me every year. Prior to COVID-19, I only had 2,000 a year. But then after COVID-19, it went up to 3,500. So that tells you that being in isolation really had an impact on the lives of many people.
I have one more question before I give it over to you real quick, Julie. And it's on the same topic. What about psychedelic drugs? Because people use those for a quote unquote spiritual experience. Do things like mushrooms and or acid, LSD, etc., do those allow entry points for demons typically? Have you seen that?
Oh, I believe they do. You look at the fentanyl crisis in the United States today. Again, people are looking for something to fill the void. The devil may not be the cause of all of our problems, but the devil can certainly take advantage of these situations to really enter into a person's life. One of the very common psychedelic drugs today is ayahuasca, coming out of South America. There are many people that are using that drug, and they believe that they're encountering this type of demonic creature. And many people that have gone on and used this drug are actually describing the same type of creature that they are encountering. So there is that danger, again, because we're trying to escape from this reality into some other reality. But if this reality is the one that God created and we're trying to get into a different reality, there is a danger that could be reality of the world of the devil and these other demons.
I've heard people who have done ayahuasca say that they encounter a female entity, Mother Ayahuasca. Yeah, and they all say the same thing. Sometimes there's other, beings that they encounter, but that's what I always hear about. And then someone once told me the spirit that is manifest through ayahuasca, it does not like the spirit that's manifest through marijuana. So you have to not smoke weed before you do ayahuasca. There's like all these things, and people talk about la dieta. They almost do they do a fast before they take this drug. And this is very popular in especially the major urban centers in the United States right now. And people think they're getting healing through it. And I'm not so sure. There's so many people that have turned away from traditional religion, Christianity specifically, and then they end up down this course of behavior where they're turning to ayahuasca for healing or insight. And from what I've heard, the results of that are not typically good. And so yeah, amongst Christians, there's much talk about it being a portal. I'm for the demonic. I'm also wondering if you could speak to signs of demonic activity, like once somebody's opened up that entry point, what are some signs that they're being possessed?
Goes back to some of the ones I mentioned earlier where, there can be the eyes rolled in the back of the head, which means that a different consciousness is taking over the body, the growling and snarling. On the sixth day of creation, what did God create? God created humans and he created animals. What separates humans from animals is that God created us for the seventh day, the Lord's day, where we can choose to honor and glorify God. So demons always act animalistic in nature when they possess a person because it's a sign of the rejection of God. So again, it's the distorting of the human person. Usually the body has a very grayish complexion, begins to look hideous and grotesque. And then there can be that levitation, the body dropping to the ground and slithering like a snake. Again, it's really ridiculing the human person. You were talking about one demon from one psychedelic drug not liking the demon from another drug. There is a hierarchy in the demonic world. And demons have no love for each other. They hate each other just as much as they hate us. But oftentimes they will work together. The belief is that when the angels fell and created the demonic world, that they fell from all different 9 choirs of angels. So the choirs of angels, we talk about the seraphim, the cherubim, the thrones, and the virtues and powers and principalities, the archangels, the angels. So they fell from all 9 choirs. So some are of a higher rank than others. So there is that ranking system even within the demonic world. And oftentimes when a person is possessed, it's not a question of one demon, but multiple demons. And the weakest demons are usually the first ones to leave because they aren't able to resist the power and the authority of the rite of exorcism as easily as maybe one who's of a higher ranking who may be the last one to go. So again, it's a crazy reality when you deal with people that are possessed, and the demons don't want to leave. They want to maintain their hold on a person. And one might say that an exorcism is really a command to a demon to return that which it has stolen, namely a person created in the image and likeness of God. And there will be a lot of resistance to do that. Demons are very legalistic. They will say, I have a right to be here because this person gave me that authority to do that. Oftentimes people create entry points because they don't understand the gravity of what they're doing. They may think something is fun and entertaining, such as taking a drug. But just because we think it's fun and entertaining doesn't mean that the devil won't use that as an opportunity to get a foothold into our lives. Other people clearly know that what they're doing is wrong, but they choose to do it anyway. Again, using their free will to walk away from God rather than drawing closer to God.
I guess we should differentiate between demon possession and then demonic attacks. Because I think good people, in the Orthodox faith, we talk about how as one maybe becomes a catechumen, you might experience more demonic attacks, or as one gets closer to baptism, you might experience more demonic attacks. That doesn't mean that person is summoning demons through, doing crazy things. Do you see that within the Catholic faith too, that good people, as they get closer to Christ, will have demonic attacks on them without necessarily being inhibited by a demon?
Absolutely. The Catholic Church identifies 4 types of extraordinary demonic activity. We've been talking about possession primarily. There is demonic infestation, presence be on a location or associated with an object. Think of a Ouija board, voodoo doll, something that was created specifically for the purpose of creating a connection between a demon and a human person. There's demonic vexation, which are physical attacks, demonic obsession, which are mental attacks. But there is something called demonic oppression. And demonic oppression are afflictions that God is permitting. Not that the person did anything wrong, but God is permitting it to happen as a particular gift from God, as an opportunity for the person to show their fidelity to God. I do think it's pretty normal for somebody who is wanting to grow in the faith to begin to experience afflictions. People that are spiritually asleep, when they start to wake up, well, that attracts the attention of the devil because the devil doesn't want to lose them. So the devil may afflict them. So I call that demonic oppression. I think of Job in the Old Testament. He didn't do anything wrong, but God permitted him to be afflicted. St. Paul in the New Testament talks about the thorn in his flesh, the messenger from Satan that was sent to torment him to keep him from becoming proud. And many of the saints of the church also experienced demonic oppression. But the good news is that whenever we are oppressed, and you're right, even people that are joining the church, they undergo certain prayers. They're called scrutiny for minor exorcisms. When that person is baptized, receive a minor exorcism. But the thing is, when the devil is afflicting us, we can use that to our advantage. Because if the devil is allowing us to see a weakness in our spiritual life, then we know where we need to put in more effort to grow in holiness and virtue. Any enemy that's going to attack will size us up and say, this is the weak point. That's where I need to target. So if the devil has allowed us to see a weakness in our spiritual lives, then again, we can use that to our advantage because we can focus on that area and then really use that as an opportunity to draw closer to God. Because, the thing is, the devil was cast out of heaven, but he wasn't cast out of creation. He still has a role to play. So God can use the devil as a way to bring people closer to himself.
How can we avoid creating an entry point for the demonic besides just, not engaging in occult practices and kind of the maybe more obvious things?
I would say that, in contrast to the extraordinary demonic activity, again, the infestation, vexation, obsession, and possession, there is the ordinary activity of the devil, which really is rooted in temptation. So the devil will try to tempt us to see if he can get us to abandon our relationship with God or give in to some particular vice rather than living in virtue. When it comes to the ordinary activity of the devil, I like to say that he uses a 4-stage plan of attack on us. And this is what all of us need to be aware of, because very few of us are ever going to have to deal with extraordinary demonic activity. But when it comes to the ordinary activity of the devil, it begins with deception. So the devil, it wants to get us to buy into his lies. When we give in to deception, it leads to division. It means we find ourselves broken. When Adam and Eve sinned against God, what's the first thing they did? They went and hid. So they tried to hide from God. We are divided. We're broken. So that division then leads to diversion, where we need God. So then without God, we will then go look for a substitute for God. There's that addictive behavior again. So the deception will lead to division, which leads to diversion, which ultimately leads to discouragement. Because again, without God in our lives, the human person lacks real meaning, purpose, and direction. So we know that something is missing. So then we lapse into discouragement. And when we arrive at discouragement, it's a crossroads. One pathway leads to death. It will always be spiritual, the complete rejection of God. 1 out of 5 Americans now claim to be an atheist. So think of the discouragement that has led people to have a spiritual death. Sometimes that death is physical. Think of the growing trend of suicide in our society today, where people just lose all hope. But the good news is, as a people of faith, the other pathway leads to discipleship. We have a spiritual reawakening where we realize we need God and we commit our lives to God again. And we do so recognizing that God is love and God is mercy. The greatest thing that we can know in life are not the sins that we can commit, but God's mercy in our lives. After Adam and Eve had sinned and they went and hid, God comes to the garden and saying, Adam, where are you? Now, God knew where Adam was. But what does that tell us about God? It tells us that whenever we are lost, God is always looking for us. I like the analogy where Adam and Eve are then cast out into the wilderness, into the desert, if you will, after original sin. When Jesus begins his public ministry, where does he begin it? He's baptized in the River Jordan. He's then driven into the desert by the Spirit. So he goes into the wilderness to do what? To look for lost humanity. But before he can do that, he has to contend with the one who caused the fall of humanity, namely the devil himself. That's where the devil shows up, tempts Jesus. Jesus refutes the temptation. So Adam and Eve gave in to the temptation. Jesus refutes it. And then he goes in search of lost humanity. The common theme throughout the Gospels, if you think about it, Jesus talks about the 99 sheep and leaving them and going in search of the lost one. The woman with the 10 coins who loses one and then searches the house to find the lost one. Think of the prodigal son. One is lost. So there's always that recognition that when we are lost, God is looking for us. And again, it speaks of God's great love for the human person.
Are there things that you have to be careful about when you're performing an exorcism with, because obviously it seems, I say obviously, it seems to me that there's a danger of you being hit with demons when you're in the presence of them. Are there things you have to specifically say or specifically avoid saying or thinking? Do you have to get your mind in a certain state of mind, I suppose?
There's a very strict protocol. So there's never such thing as an emergency exorcism. So an exorcist is trained to be a skeptic. I should be the last person to believe that somebody is dealing with extraordinary demonic activity. I need to exhaust every other possible explanation. So I would require the person to have some type of a psychiatric evaluation. Sometimes people hear that and say, well, you don't believe me. And I also respond by saying, but if it is demonic, you need to be in a good place mentally before going through an exorcism. You can't be in a crisis mode, if you will. The person is required to have a physical examination by a medical doctor. I would do an intake questionnaire trying to determine where the entry point was. I would look for 4 signs of possible demonic possession, which are the ability to speak and understand languages otherwise unknown to the individual, having superhuman strength, elevated perception, and then a negative reaction to anything of a sacred nature. I have to prepare myself. As a priest, I will celebrate Mass. I will go to confession. I will spend time in prayer and fast. And there is a prayer at the very beginning of the rite that asks God to protect and safeguard myself and everyone else who's present for this exorcism of the church. I don't rely on anything during an exorcism other than the power of God. No one is tied into a chair. They're not fastened down. None of that. And when all of these things are done properly, demons ultimately have to obey the power of God. And the good thing too is, to point out, demons cannot read our minds. They don't know what we're thinking. Only God knows what we're thinking, and only God knows the future. But again, demons are very intellectual. They can watch us. They can observe us. They can use deductive reasoning to speculate what we might be thinking or how we might act, and then present that as a fact, but it's really nothing more than an educated guess. Even when Jesus is being tempted, remember when the devil shows up, what does he say? If you are the Son of God, command these stones to turn to bread. So he's really looking for Jesus to show his hand. So he has a good idea. And many of the fathers of the church say that the demons seem to have known that God was planning the incarnation. So they could see that. God permitted them to see that in this knowledge that they received. Because the basic premise is that when angels were created, they received infused knowledge. They don't have to learn anything. They can just call it up like a computer downloaded with information. That's why one is possessed to speak a language that person as an individual did not study. That's why there can be superhuman strength, elevated perception. Again, they're very intellectual, and they can use this intellect as a way to try to manipulate us, confuse, and control us.
So I have 2 questions that are somewhat related. What is the primary goal of a demon possessing someone, or Satan? What's Satan's primary goal? And then also, could you speak to where angels and demons originally come from? I think people know that Satan rejected God, but Can you speak a little bit about and how they were created and how they came to be?
The creation of the angelic world is really not known. It was St. Augustine, again, who speculated that we can see the creation of the angelic world in the book of Genesis when God says, "Let there be light." When we think of light, we think of intellect. If you have a great idea, we say, the light came on. You might see a cartoon with a light bulb above somebody's head. So God said, "Let there be light." There was light and it was good. But then immediately the light was separated into day and darkness. But the separation wasn't called good. Now, this is the first day of creation. This cannot be the sun or the moon or the stars, because in the book of Genesis, they were not created until the third day. So what is this light that God said, "Let there be"? So St. Augustine says he believed that it was the creation of the angelic world. And so God created the angels. He gave them this infused knowledge, and then basically said to the angels, "With all the knowledge I've given you, will you now unite your free will with mine?" And then the belief was that Lucifer, the greatest of the angelic creatures, a seraphim angel closest to the throne of God. The word seraphim means the fiery one. So if you're close to God, you're literally on fire for God. It's like getting close to a fire and catching fire yourself. But then Lucifer rejected that notion of glorifying God. And angels in a higher choir and influence angels in a lower choir. So when he chose to rebel against God, his rebellion reverberated through the 9 choirs of angels, and then 1/3 of them embraced his rejection of God. And then they were cast down to the earth. So that's where "Let there be light." There was day and darkness. The day would refer to good angels, the darkness to the bad angels who were expelled from heaven. And ultimately, the goal of the devil would be for humanity to make the same choice that he himself has made, namely the complete rejection of God. Angelic creatures cannot repent. Sometimes people wonder, could the devil ever say, "I'm sorry"? And in reality, the answer is no, because it would not even occur to the devil to say that. And it's because of their angelic nature. Again, when angels were created, they're in the presence of all that they can know. So the devil knew before the fall that one of the consequences of him saying no to God was eternal damnation. And yet, even with that knowledge, he chose it anyway. So a demon could never say, "I didn't know that." A human person can. We can grow in our understanding and say, "Well, that was a dumb thing to do. I didn't know that." We can change and repent. But that's not true for an angelic creature. So demons cannot repent, and good angels cannot fall. Their judgment has now taken place. But again, the devil would want humanity to join him in his rebellion against God. It's the notion that misery loves company.
With your experience, you obviously have a good amount of people that you've seen with possession. Do you ever see people on the street or on TV or, I don't know, even famous people, politicians, where you look at them and you think, that person is demonically possessed, I can tell?
Yes, absolutely. And even if they're not possessed, to be able to know that on some level they're being afflicted. I've had people that's out in public, and even if I'm not wearing clerical garb, if I'm heading to go for a hike or whatever, go fishing, I encounter people that I believe are dealing with demonic affliction in their life. And the demon that's connected to that person has a very negative reaction against me. Because the truth is, the devil knows those who are fighting against him to defeat him. So people that have this demonic connection, whether it's possession or affliction, the demon in them will have a negative reaction. And it's not just me. Many of my colleagues in this ministry will say that they have the same reaction when they're out in public. Even when I trained in Rome, I would spend the day at this church where the exorcisms were being performed. And then I had about a 15-minute bus ride and then about a half an hour walk back to where I was staying in Rome. And literally, the looks that I would get from certain people just convinced me that there was a demonic connection with them. I remember getting on the bus one time in Rome, and the bus was packed. It was during rush hour. And literally, when I got on, everybody just moved away from me as far as they could get. So nobody ever said anything. but I could tell that there was some type of demonic presence that did not want to be around.
Wow.
Wow.
That is
That's wild.
Yeah. I want to walk through the streets with you and just see who avoids this. Julie, I have kind of a bigger one to wrap with, but do you have anything before I get to that one?
No, I don't think so. You can go ahead.
I say it's a big one. It's not. It's something that I just deal with it all the time. So I figure, you know what? I'm going to do this to someone else, because people always say, Buck, what's the craziest thing you've ever seen in your job? You've seen a lot, blah, blah, blah. And, at first I used to think, what a strange question, but now I have fun with it. So I have to ask you this too, Father Vincent. You've gone over a couple of things that sounds like you have seen. I think a lot of people are going to go, ask him if he really saw someone levitate. That was crazy that he said that. But what are some of the crazier things that you've seen?
I have seen the human body levitate. One of the exorcisms in Rome that I was sitting in on. So when the demon manifested, this hideous grin came on the face. And so I knew it was a demon. And then the demon is staring right at me and then just grinning. And then the body begins to rise. I've done an exorcism when the demon manifested, the person's eyeballs turned green and their pupils became slanted like a serpent. And the demon says to me, you can't get rid of us. We've been here too long and you're not strong enough. And then began to laugh and scream and ridicule and mock me. I've had a woman that was possessed by 7 demons. And when I commanded the demons to name themselves, 7 different voices came out of the person's mouth at the same time, if you can try to even conceptualize that. So there were 7 different names of demons that came out of the person's mouth. I've seen a person that was possessed, that their jaw dropped down and then kind of moved off to the side. Again, the demon is trying to instill fear in all of these things. When that body levitated in Rome, and I'm looking at it kind of in disbelief and thinking, what in the world am I getting myself into in the ministry of exorcism? But the priest training me, he never said a word, but he reached over in his hand and put it on the head of the person and put the body back down there. So he never even stopped for one moment praying the rite of exorcism. And I think he was saying to me, ignore the theatrics and the parlor tricks. The real focus is on the power of God here within the ministry of exorcism. So it's really not what the devil is doing, it's what God wants to do.
I have one question that made me think of. After you've done a successful exorcism and the person is exorcised, do you ever see them become the same person, become repossessed, or is it typically like a one-time thing?
They can become repossessed. That's why even before I begin to work with somebody, I have to believe that they're sincere. In Luke's gospel, in chapter 11, it talks about how once the demon has been cast out, it goes and wanders through the arid wasteland. And then coming back and finding the house swept clean, it goes and finds 7 other demons, works in itself, and they come and take up residence in the person. The danger for a person who's been possessed is that the devil knows that he was successful in the past, and maybe he can be successful again, which is why it's so important for the person who was possessed to have that desire to have a relationship with God. So it's not just a matter of casting the demon out. God has to be invited in. I would even say that casting the demon out is the easy part, but convincing someone that they really need to have that relationship with God that will give them that ongoing protection can be a hard thing to do, because we all know that when we're in a crisis mentality, we'll do and say anything. The old adage, there's no atheist in a foxhole. But then when the crisis passes, maybe somebody lapses back into old patterns and behaviors that may have allowed that demon to enter into their life. So again, it's very, very important for the person to either, again, reconnect with their faith or maybe come to God for the very first time. And if people don't express that desire, there are some people over the years I've chosen not to work with, but out of a sense of charity, realizing, yeah, your situation is bad, but it can become 7 times worse if you're not truly sincere in wanting to invite God into your life.
You must read the Screwtape Letters with a very different perspective than the rest of us. I assume you've read that book, and what do you think of it as someone who does what you do?
I think it does a great job of speaking about the reality of the devil and putting the devil in terms that is easy for us to understand. Because oftentimes people look at the devil and think, well, the devil is kind of out there somewhere, but not something that I have to contend with. But in reality, I do think all of us are dealing with demonic activity on some level, whether it's that extraordinary, whether it's ordinary, or even the people that are just wanting to draw closer to God and discover that they're being afflicted even more. So again, I think the demonic is a component of all of our lives. I would even suggest that Jesus' ministry is one of exorcism. He came to free humanity from the grip of the devil that came about through the fall of humanity, and then to lead humanity back into paradise, if you will, the tree of life.
Excellent. That's a good way to end. This almost seems weird to ask you this. Do you have anything to plug? Do you have a website? Or I guess there could be someone out there that hears this and thinks, I know so-and-so that this person could use Father Vincent's help. Is there a way they can find you online?
Yeah, if people put my name out there, they're going to find all kinds of information. I always say that I have nothing to plug other than faith in Jesus Christ. So I'm not about promoting myself. I'm not promoting any books or materials. But it's really, to me, being public in the ministry of exorcism. And my bishop gave me that permission because many exorcists choose to remain anonymous. They don't want to deal with the volume of people that I deal with. But I think it's a great opportunity to evangelize people and tell them that a relationship with God does really make a difference. You know, all of the emails I get are not necessarily people who think they're possessed or asking for help. I get many great emails from people who say that they may have watched something on the internet, an interview that I did, and it inspired them to either go and join the church or return to their faith, kind of a spiritual awakening. So I really see exorcism as a form of evangelization. You know, the ministry has given me the opportunity to travel throughout the United States, even other parts of the world. And the reality is there are a lot of people that are just suffering. And I think when people realize that a relationship with God can help them address the pain and suffering in their lives. You know, people think of church a lot of times and they think of rules and regulations, but it's really about a relationship that can really transform our lives and lead us out of that deception, division, diversion, and discouragement and give us true meaning, purpose, hope, and direction in our life.
It's got to be a great tool, like you said, for evangelizing, because I think a lot of people just think of Christianity and something in their rational mind says, that can't be real, that's silly, there's no miracles, there's no spirits. They're basically materialists, right? Everything that exists is in front of us in the material world, nothing outside of that. And they see you explaining these stories like you've been telling us, and they think, well, there must be something, right? And so maybe it's got,
or they think I'm crazy. I have people tell me that too, but if I'm going to be crazy, I want to be crazy for God.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, a fool for Christ. Father Vincent Lampert, thanks so much for being here with us on Counterflow. And thank you, Julie, for co-hosting again.
Sure.
Oh, what did you think about that? Now, I should have advertised this at the beginning, but I'm going to do it at the end. Patreon.com/Counterflow. $5 or more per month gets you in our exclusive club where we have our once a month Zoom call with myself, you guys, and a special guest. Opens up to a Q&A. And like I mentioned the other day, last time we did it, I think after the guest, it was Aman Jabi. After he hung up the call with us, several of us stayed on for like an hour, just shooting the breeze, as they say. Fun time. Patreon.com/Counterflow. As for this show, counterflowpodcast.com is the website. You can follow me on Twitter at BuckRebel, BuckRebel. What else? The YouTube page. Go and subscribe to the YouTube page. Hopefully you watched this on the YouTube page, at least for the sake of seeing Julie's pretty face. Not necessarily mine or Father Vincent, I suppose. But I hope you guys subscribe to the YouTube channel. Of course, we're on Rumble and Odyssey as well. And until next week, where I have a very big guest. very special, big guest. He's never, ever done this show, and we were DMing and decided it's time to end the streak of not doing this show. That's all the hints that you're going to get. Until next week, you guys have a good one.
You get split in half, but I call the hologram brass. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid, and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Like the sound of the Counterflow podcast? Our audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.